The TAP Code, a secret form of communication uniquely created by the Vietnam prisoners of war, was essential for their survival. Prior to the Vietnam War, the United States wanted to stop communism from spreading throughout Asian countries. This started with the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union directly after World War II. Also leading up to the Vietnam War, France, who were largely supported by the United States, suffered a defeat against the Viet Minh at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. After this defeat, the French lost control over Indochina, and the 17th parallel, which was a divide between the French and Viet Minh militaries, was established. This created a separation between the communistic North Vietnam and South Vietnam. During the Vietnam War, North Vietnam was aided by the USSR and China, while South Vietnam was run by France and was supported by the United States and other anti-communist countries. A theory that had derived from the Cold War was the domino theory. This theory, famous from 34th President Dwight D. Eisenhower, stated that a communist-controlled government in one nation would quickly spread to neighboring countries and a communist takeover would begin. The domino theory was further supported when former United States Secretary of State John Foster Dulles said,
"If the communist forces won uncontested control over Indochina or any substantial part thereof, they would surely resume the same pattern of aggression against other free peoples in the area."
Although the Cold War did not lead to any military confrontation, President John F. Kennedy approved a military campaign in North Vietnam in 1961 after it was believed Communist China was supporting them. The United States were weary of the communism rule Joseph Stalin had in his country and did not want it to spread throughout other Asian countries, including South Vietnam. 38th President of the United States, Gerald Ford, later stated that,
"The communist leaders in Moscow, Peking, and Hanoi must fully understand that the United States considers the freedom of South Vietnam vital to our interests, and they must know that we are not bluffing in our determination to defend those interests."
In June of 1959, the first U.S. soldiers were killed in Vietnam, but America did not officially enter the Vietnam War until 1964. In that same year, the first American prisoner of war, Commander Everett Alvarez Jr., was captured and placed in the Hanoi Hilton, the most infamous North Vietnamese prison. Alvarez was the first of roughly 776 American POWs that were eventually captured and imprisoned during the Vietnam War. Most of these prisoners were from the Air Force and had been shot down over Vietnam. However, there was still a handful of prisoners captured from smaller platoons on enemy land. While being held in prison, the prisoners needed a way of communicating without the guards knowing. The TAP code consisted of a 5x5 matrix that prisoners could use to tap out letters and words. As Ron Maston, former prisoner of war, explains,
They took the alphabet and threw out the letter K and then made a 5x5 matrix of the remaining letters, and they spelled out every word. And if you wanted to use a K, you just substitute a C for the K. So across the top line, you'd have A, B, C, D, E. And the next line would be F, G, H, I, J, and then there's no K, so L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z.
This code was simple and easy to use for prisoners, and new prisoners could usually learn it within their first day. The first series of taps would correspond with the row of the letter being used, while the second series of taps would correspond with the column.
It's like if you wanted to say hi, you'd tap 2, 3, 2, 4. Tap, 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 tap. That would signify H. Tap, 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 tap. That would be an I. So you just spelled out hi. So you spelled out every word.
Former prisoner of war Ron Maston was born and raised in Beloit, Kansas. Before joining the Vietnam War, Maston graduated from the University of Kansas. On January 16, 1967, Maston was shot down by the North Vietnamese. He was forced to parachute from his aircraft and land in enemy territory. Maston eluded capture until the next morning, after he was surrounded by armed Vietnamese. He spent 2,239 days in captivity and was one of 776 other American POWs during the Vietnam War. The conditions inside of the prisons were horrific. Upon arrival at the prison, most prisoners were beaten by the prison guards in an effort to force information out of the captured. They were kept in isolation and beaten every day by the North Vietnamese in an attempt to get any information about the war. After the isolation, they were put into small concrete cells with the same poor food every day. They were given one t-shirt, one long-sleeve shirt, one pair of shorts, and one pair of pants. The American prisoners were kept in their cells all day and were never given any information about the war effort or news from home. The North Vietnamese also wanted to use the prisoners for propaganda. Some photos that were released from Vietnam made it seem like they treated imprisoned Americans with the utmost respect. However, this propaganda was just an attempt to gain support internationally and rid any rumors about mistreatment of prisoners. One form of propaganda was having prisoners attend and speak for televised press conferences. These prisoners were forced to comply and spread rumors about great treatment within prisons. The programs worked very well for the North Vietnamese until 1966, when Commander Jeremiah Denton famously blinked the word torture in Morse code. This confirmed that the North Vietnamese were lying about their prison's conditions. The prisoners' morale and mental health would rapidly decline without communication and support from other prisoners. To do this, the prisoners would tap through the walls to each other. Khalil Harris was the first prisoner to use the tap code. While in training, he saw the code in the classroom and asked if it was Morse code. His instructor told him it was the tap code and taught him the code. After Harris was shot down by the North Vietnamese, he remembered the code and taught it to the other prisoners. To do this, Harris would slip the code to a different prisoner and tell him to memorize the code, then pass the note on to the next prisoner. The tap code spread throughout the entire prison system quickly as prisoners were moved around frequently. Some other prisons that held American POWs includes Alcatraz, Zoo, Dirty Bird, Skid Row, and Plantation, along with numerous others. When transferred prisoners got to new prisons, they taught the tap code. They used the tap code every day, any way they could. Air Force Captain Pete Peterson quotes,
As it turns out, the code was very, very fast. Even if you just tapped with your finger or knuckles or your hand, you could pass a tremendous amount of information through the wall. To give you an idea, we passed Shakespeare through the wall, we passed movies, we passed our biographies, and biographies of others we knew about. It was our entertainment. We talked or tapped on the walls for hours and hours into the day and night.
This quote from Pete Peterson illustrates how important the tap code was to American POWs. Not only was it a way of communication about the North Vietnamese, but it was also their entertainment and their way of living. The prisoners became incredibly proficient in the tap code and would often understand what was being tapped to them before it was finished. They tapped all the time whenever they could, being cautious not to get caught by the North Vietnamese guards. Former POW James Stockdale recalls,
Our tapping ceased to be just an exchange of letters and words. It became a conversation.
Many of these prisoners suffered in prisons like the Hanoi Hilton for numerous years, and forms of communication like the tap code helped preserve the POW's sanity, morale, and health. When peace accords were signed following the war on January 27, 1973, it was agreed upon that all American prisoners of war would be released from North Vietnam. The plan to bring the prisoners home was known as Operation Homecoming. During the spring of 1973, over 500 of the known prisoners were released and returned home. However, the United States stated that there were roughly 2,500 prisoners of war or soldiers missing in action. This led to many Americans believing that there were many more prisoners still being held captive. Throughout the following decades, the United States and Vietnam held many investigations looking into the missing soldiers, but it is stated that there is no compelling evidence that proves that any American remains alive in captivity in Southeast Asia.
Do you believe that the tap code was essential almost for the survival of many prisoners of war?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because, like I say, I think communications was the most important thing that kept us going. And the tap code was the primary way we communicated.